RN was supposed to do a paper on why government matters. This is what she wrote.
It doesn't. Well said.
Hey everyone. So remember when you were in school and you were taught concepts on economics, government, science, etc., which seemed so Orwellian and nonsensical, how they were inappropriately crammed down your throat in completely unrelated classes, and people have wanted to document these cases for the longest time, but many schools have just straight up refused to tell people what they're teaching their students? Well, a lot of people do, because today's video is easily one of my most requested topics since I've opened my channel. Now, I've been an open critic of the Prussian model of education for a while. I made a whole video on it, as a matter of fact, back on my first channel, so I'm not going to go too much into detail on my criticisms regarding government indoctrination centers, but TLDW, all governments in the world base their public schooling off of the Prussian model, which was specifically designed to indoctrinate students into becoming obedient to the government when the Prussian population was starting to reject the Kaiser regime. This is both documented officially by the Prussian government's own statements at the time, but also by the figures who were key in designing the Prussian model, such as Johann Gottlieb Fichte. So the propaganda in government school is a direct result of how government education is structurally designed and was deliberately intended to produce. I knew there were a few people who were in my Discord server that were in school because they complain quite a bit about what they're taught in regards to economics and government, and I decided to ask them if they could provide me with some screenshots of their textbooks. And holy shit, you people better brace yourselves, because this is the cringiest, most insane statist political propaganda I think I've ever seen. And our children are being force-fed this garbage. Alright, so this is the first picture, and I already want to scrape out my own intestines with a hedge trimmer. This is how students are being taught to view the government in economics. It's only stealing from you and intervening because you wanted it. Who said they wanted it? When did anyone ever concede to this? Where did they say they wanted it? How did the government obtain this supposed consent? Where is the evidence of this agreement? If everyone all wanted every single regulation the government imposed onto the market, how come laws need to be imposed to begin with? Why do black markets exist despite commodities being banned by the state from recreational use? Also, I just love how social contract theory is so fucking stupid that the only way you can get anyone to believe it is to bash it into their still developing minds while they're school children. Let's see, the government is a protector because you're too stupid not to buy products which you know will kill you. Yes, the classic statist contradiction that private actors need government regulation because they aren't smart enough to look out for their own well-being, yet simultaneously we're smart enough to have supposedly formed a government for the express purpose of looking out for their own well-being. Which of course is not true, since private actors naturally don't want to buy defective products because doing so would defeat the purpose of even trying to obtain the commodity in question to begin with. This is an economics class textbook which doesn't even understand the concept of market trust. Jesus fucking Christ. I mean, market trust is a completely uncontroversial, well-documented phenomenon which every school of economics has their own take on. The writer of this passage has no excuse for this level of economic illiteracy. And don't even get me started about the last bit, how the government gives people property rights. Ugh. Because that, again, is another bold contradiction. The government is an entity which, through having a monopoly on arbitration, gives itself full dominion of all property owned by the citizens within its claimed territory, and a government fundamentally requires the forcible seizure of property in the form of taxation to fund itself. The government is an entity which requires the dominion of all property produced by private citizens to exist, meaning that as long as governments exist, citizens necessarily don't have the right to their own property. There's also the metaphysical blunder of thinking that rights have to be given to someone rather than an innate characteristic every person has. If ethics operated in this manner, then the concept of a right wouldn't exist, since all propriety would be arbitrary, meaning that nothing could be defined as an inalienable characteristic, since all ethics would have to be created by an arbiter to exist in the first place. So what would be the purpose of state licensing then? Licensing laws are a product of corporatism in which the government imposes arbitrary price increases, or in the case of the FDA, will simply force competitors out of the market in order to protect competitors based on political favoritism. A great example being on April 12, 1992, when the FDA voted 5-4 against allowing the unnamed corporation to manufacture silicone. Then on the very next day, April 13th, 1992, the exact same panel voted 7-2 in favor of allowing the Mentor Corporation to manufacture silicone under the exact same circumstances. In other words, licensing exists for the express purpose of regulatory capture. Speaking of which, if you thought that was cringy, you should see public education's take on monopolization. No, natural monopolies cannot form. Monopolies fundamentally require coercion in order to exist. An absence of competition only incentivizes producers to enter the market and provide service, and landmass is irrelevant since you can just build more space, as is often what happens in crowded metropolitan areas, for example. Also, I love how under natural monopolies the textbook cites regulatory capture as an example of monopolies forming naturally. You know, the government using force to keep competitors out of the market and increase the cost of production through regulation to limit the people able to enter the market exclusively to the politically connected and extremely wealthy. You know, the exact opposite of a natural monopoly. Oh, and in case you partially read the text above this and only temporarily lost the will to live because you couldn't see the full box, well, here it is. I don't really need to say anything considering that literally not even half a page down the textbook contradicts itself and makes my argument for me by claiming that a laissez-faire market is more likely to form monopolies, but then immediately stating that government regulation causes monopolies to form. And fucking really, the book is gonna try and claim that no one can compete with the US Post Office, so that I have to invoke Lysander Spooner yet again and point out how he competed with the Post Office with his American Mail Company 150 years ago, and was able to reduce the price of shipping mail by half, also drastically improving the quality of service. And he only went out of business because the government forced him out of business, since people were beginning to use his service more than the post office. Yeah, people have complained with how much I cite this guy when making arguments, and I'm sorry about that, but when you have as many accomplishments and notable writings under your belt as Spooner does, you tend to be referenced a lot in debates. Oh, and you can't have statist propaganda without lies about the Great Depression and the New Deal, when a stock market bubble caused by the Federal Reserve manipulating interest rates to create loans led to inflation, and business costs rose with the inflation naturally, triggered a recession. Herbert Hoover attempted to create a credit expansion. In other words, the government printed money for the sole purpose of subsidizing the banks with it, which of course only increased the inflation, in turn making the Depression 1,000 times worse than it would have been had the Federal Reserve and the government not attempted to subsidize these banks, many of which were interest banks, meaning that their speciality is to give loans. The Great Depression was entirely the fault of the government, and the fact that these propagandists will blatantly lie and claim that Herbert Hoover was a non-interventionist when he had the exact same fucking policies which they turn around and praise FDR for is really telling how weak their narrative is. You know, if the fact that in order to carry this agenda they need to lie about it constantly in textbooks and force it onto impressionable children wasn't already a dead giveaway, that's bullshit. But let's see what other trash they wrote here. Social Security is just a Ponzi scheme which only exists as a cash grab. Minimum wage isn't required due to competition incentivizing producers to raise their pay rate so that laborers are more willing to work for them over competitors. And the only economic effect that the minimum wage has on the job market is to lower the amount of jobs available by increasing the cost required to run and maintain production. This is again basic, well-established economic truth that is recognized by every school of economics with the exception of Keynesians. So, an economics textbook making this error is fucking inexcusable. There's no such thing as a guaranteed investment because there's no such thing as a commodity entitlement. So unemployment programs are stupid for that reason, but also because governments get all of their resources from coercively appropriating it from the private sector, meaning that it would be impossible for the government to invest as well as a private actor would be able to. On top of having significantly less marginal utility, since all the state has to do in order to obtain more funds is to simply take more, there is a longer process in having the government take money and invest it rather than just having the private individual who created it invest it to begin with, meaning that government spending also has a different rate of opportunity cost and a lower time preference. If government spending didn't suffer from these inherent problems, the best case even statists could argue for would be the government being able to invest your money as well as you could, in which case, even according to their own standard, why would it affect the economy any differently than if private individuals were to just invest it directly? And I don't even think I need to get into the SEC because I already explained the incentive companies gain from competition and market trust earlier on. Anyways, it's rather unfortunate but not unexpected that government schools would resort to pushing demonstrable pseudoscience in order to push students towards political views which would be more favorable to the government. And it's really just another reason why you should be looking into more alternative methods to teach kids. That's all for today's video, and just a quick announcement, I'm going to be out of town until Sunday, September 2nd, and even then I probably won't upload again until Tuesday or so the next week. So don't worry, I didn't get suicided by the government, nor did anything else happen to me.